Good evening. This is Tech China and I'm Timo Chu. We're here at day 3 of the Mobile Electronics Fair at Asia-World-Expo. After a stimulating conversation on day 1 and 2 about startups and drones, today we're going to be talking about wearables, specifically smartwatches. I'm joined by HKUST Professor of Innovation and Director of Industry Engagement, Michael Sung, to the right. And in the middle is Block Watch founder, Fred Chak, in the middle chair. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.
Let's talk about wearables, specifically smartwatches. Everyone's heard of the Apple Watch and the Fitbits. My question to you is, what kind of technologies did these two brands build upon? And where has wearables come since its inception in the 80s?
Okay. Maybe I can field that question. I actually was one of the principal investigators for the MIT Wearable Computing Group in the Media Lab. And I think a lot of the sort of genesis of the industry was from that lab. So I've seen the evolution. I was lucky enough to see the evolution. In the beginning, the technology was more practical. It was basically, how do I get this desktop computer with their hardware on the body? And so when you put it on, you literally look like the Borg. You know, it was one of our alums, Steve Mann. He was the earliest guy doing this in the sort of mid '90s. He had a big antenna on his head, and it really looked quite excessive. But through the evolution, by the time I joined the lab in sort of early 2000s, it was about over 10 years ago, the technology had radically matured. Introduction of the first smartphones came about. We used to have to actually custom design everything, including the sensors, the communication protocols, all that kind of stuff. So things like the accelerometer, which you take for granted in your cell phone today, we actually had to customize and do. So it was the first time with the cell phone technology that we're starting to get to commoditized hardware where you can leverage volume and cost and the industrial apparatus to actually reduce the costs and to integrate technologies. So I came aboard right around then, and it was very, very exciting because we could start to do a lot of very interesting research. I was the health wearables guy, so it was the first time that we could actually take these devices into the field, strap them on, people with different diseases and health conditions, and then be able to get quantitative data from that. And I think that's becoming an emerging trend. So since then, the lab has, I think the founders of the lab have gone on to great things. Thad Starner was the main technical consultant to Google Glass. Richard Duvall started the Apple Watch project. Another guy is now the VP of engineering at Samsung Gear. So I see that, it's nice to see that we've come a long way since the early days. It used to be very not sexy. Now wearables actually is quite sexy, so I'm pretty excited to see what the future holds.
Yes. And in terms of Apple and Fitbit, it's very interesting because I don't really see them coming out because of consumer demand. Like Fitbit, they are really successful because they got huge backing from insurance company, like the health aspect of it, it makes it really successful financially. Obviously, Apple, they do everything, executes everything really well, and they got huge marketing power behind them. So it's more like we got a few huge companies like Apple. They try to push this out to the market and push it to the consumer, not the another way around. So that's something that I found very interesting for this wave of wearable products.
Walking around the expo this time around, it seems that there's no shortage of manufacturers seeking to capitalize off the trail blazed by Apple Watch and by Fitbit. What kind of incremental developments can we expect in the near future?
I've seen this a lot, the evolution of the industry quite a bit. Actually, the evolution of different industries, because I study innovation and how different industries kind of build out. And I think the wearables industries is following the same trend. In the beginning, it's all about the raw technology. It's like what kind of sensors, what kind of functionality, and things like that. So even this iteration this year, hundreds of wearable watches. It's all about adding the new heart rate sensor or the new this sensor or that sensor. So I think we'll see a lot of that happen for the next couple of years. But where I think the development is in terms of where things should get a little bit more interesting is what to do with the sensors. The sophistication of the sort of value-added functionality or service, I think has yet to really develop. And I think that's really where a lot of the opportunity will come. If you look at Fitbit, for example, that functionality, we call that the quantified self, being able to actually quantify your physiology or your movement and things like that. Well, that technology has been around for, I would say, almost 15 years. When I was a grad student at the Media Lab, there was a company called Body Media, which is the predecessor to maybe one of the granddaddy things. It was like an arm wearable. It had GSRs, galvanic skin response, to measure sweat, heart rates, and motion sensors and things like that. So that kind of technology has existed for almost, I would say, 15 years. I don't think Fitbit has done too much beyond that, right? We can still see our sleeping patterns and when we're moving and our activity and things like that. But we haven't really bumped up in terms of the level of sophistication, in terms of the analysis, the behavior, identifying, data mining the body and identifying the patterns of our behavior and then making useful inferences from that. So I think that's where the next phase of evolution will develop.
I totally agree. And the interesting thing is, then a lot of technology have the same way they're available 20 years ago and never get on, and someone just do the same thing and it suddenly become very successful. And I believe one part of it is about capturing people's imagination. This technology is everywhere. We have it most of the things we are using now. The technology is from 10 or 20 years ago. Wireless charging in Tesla, we're talking about 100 years ago. We already have wireless charging. But interesting thing is, when we work with technology, if we don't come from how the user is going to use it, how our consumer is going to accept it, and how it will work in our current society, then they're just technology.
Just gadgets.
Yeah, they're just gadgets. How technology will start to integrate with people is when people start caring about them, and when that affects people's everyday life, and people find functions for themselves at that moment, and when that moment is now and here, then they become successful. So I think a lot of companies nowadays, they do not spend enough time to work with the community, work with the users, and understanding what they really need. Then we will have a lot of products that flying around with a lot of technology involved, but not useful for people. So I think that's the difference between successful and not successful in technology, and why some of them happened years ago and catch on.
All right, well, earlier today, we took a walk around the expo to see what manufacturers had to offer. Let's take a look at that clip.
Actually, this product is a special design for ladies. First, this is a decoration for ladies, and the second function is for pedometer and sleeping monitor, and calculate the calories burning every day.
This is our new product named Xiaochai Smart Jewelry Bracelet. We can connect it with our phone's Bluetooth. If there a call come in, we can remove this Bluetooth. Then you can press this answer key, to talk to the people like this, just like a cell phone.
Nearly 2 years ago, there are two students at Imperial College, London, UK, come together, want to make a smartwatch together. Their name is Alireza and Serge. So Serge and Alireza, Serge want to make a sport smartwatch, and Alireza want to make a gesture control smartwatch because he is an expert in that field. But the problem is that they couldn't compromise. They both want to make what they like, and they just won't budge. So after a while, Alireza come up with an idea, let's don't do compromise. Let's work together on something that can serve both purposes. And that's where the modularity idea came from. So what we are trying to do is, we are trying to create the first smartwatch that is not a gadget. Smartphones are very useful because they have millions of applications. You can do anything on your smartphones nowadays. What we are trying to do is we want to turn smartwatch into something as powerful as a smartphone. And the only way we can do this is to provide user with hundreds, if not thousands, of different modules, all with different functions, some by us, some by our partners. And because we are going to have so many functions, software developers can develop additional software applications based on these functions. So the possibility and the usefulness is going to be even more than a smartphone, not to mention like a lot more than any other smartwatch you can find on the market.
Welcome back. Now, Fred's Choose watch really stood out in terms of the offerings. We were just saying that a lot of the manufacturers are basically following the path of either Apple Watch or Fitbit. Now, Fred, yours is a modular watch, and you're offering hundreds, if not thousands, of different kind of functionalities. Let's talk more about functionality. Really focus in on there. I mean, what's the next level of expectations in terms of what consumers want, and where are manufacturers in terms of meeting those kind of demands?
Yes. So the interesting thing about functionality is it's very hard for a company or for any corporations to predict what people want. And maybe like us as a company or like corporations trying to predict what people want is the wrong way of doing things. Like imagine like back then when iPhone just have the App Store and they just starting to work with 3G internet connection. People don't know what 3G is for. They don't know what this kind of data connection and applications can do. People imagined maybe they will use the phones to do video chat, but that thing like takes 10 years or 20 years to catch on. And between that period, a lot of other useful apps and the games like go into phones, and people don't expect phones to using their phones to play games. Mobile phone companies, like applications developers, they didn't envision that. This happened when people start using it. So I would say like if a company trying to predict what is going to be popular and what you can do with certain functions or device or technology, you're probably wrong 5 out of 10 times. Okay. So the beautiful of blogs is we are not trying to tell everybody like what they can do with blogs and what they can use and what application they can write. We are a platform. We are a ecosystem. We try to encourage partners from the hardware side and software side to develop like different modules, different applications, and we don't know what they are, and we don't want to know what they are. We want people to come to us with something totally different and we have never heard about, we've never heard of. They will change people's perception about wearables, how people see wearables. That is how we think wearables will move to the next stage. Because if you ask me what will be the next stage of wearables, whatever I say will not be the future, because people are just trying to turn a smartwatch into a smaller smartphone. That's most of the smartwatch now they're trying to do. They're just like a stripped down version of a smartphone. That's not what wearables should be, because they act so differently. The screen is so small, but they are with you like 24 hours per day, 7 days a week. The way we interact with them is totally different, but we have not seen them that way. Okay. So I'm waiting for our partners to come to us with something like so weird, like a smell sensor or some sensor that we don't even know that they exist. And then I think those sensors, those technology, those ideas will open up the possibilities. Then we'll find what is the most popular killer app and functions that people want. So we will need to let people decide. We need to let the community choose what they want. Not us.
So it's kind of like crowdsourcing functionality.
You can say that, yes.
Michael, do you have any take on this? Or?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the themes are, what Fred is doing is very important, which is developing the core capability
an open
platform. And what he's saying that the creative and the needs of the people are going to come to the fore. My perspective is this: wearables. Why wearables, right? Wearables, the opportunity here is around context awareness. Okay? As you bring the device closer to the body, and in some cases attached to the body, then you can get a lot of more intimate in terms of understanding the immediate context of the user. Things like your physiology, your heart rate, your emotions, who you're talking to, all sorts of stuff like that. And I think the opportunity then is to take this context and meaningfully make the system aware of what you're doing, and then make the system predictive of what you're going to do in the future, and then to react proactively to what you're doing. I think this is the opportunity, right? So, as an example, in my PhD research, I was looking at non-invasive sensing to correlate to depression. All right, so depression is something that's kind of like a hard to define kind of term, and actually the way that they measured depression before was just basically a quiz, basically a checklist of symptoms and things like that. It was not very quantitative, and so what we were able to do was correlate things like your degree of motion, just motion energy, the amount of time you stay active, plus vocal features, basically your pitch variation and things like that. And we can actually correlate that to depression, which makes sense, right? A depressed patient stays in bed longer, and when they talk slower and a little bit more monotone. You can actually catch these features. But the interesting thing is now we have a quantitative way of being able to predict depression. And so that kind of research, for example, now is implemented. There's a company called Ginger.io from one of my colleagues from the media lab, who is now productized that. Now with the cell phone in your pocket, with no other sensors, no other devices, we can actually predict things like depression or bipolar behavior, all sorts of interesting things. And these actually have useful outcomes. So this kind of context awareness of pulling in these raw sensing things in a more sophisticated way, I think, is the direction we're going. You think about it, right? We used to talk about smart kitchen technology, this is way before IoT, right? But the idea was, okay, well, I'm walking down the street and the wearable knows that I'm next to the supermarket, and it also knows that I'm out of milk or eggs, right? So that simple functionality of understanding this diverse set of multimodal data, and then doing something useful like telling me I need to go to the store. Actually, technically, that technology exists and has existed for a very long time. But yet, I don't think very many people are doing that. People are still sort of focusing, let's make this heart sensor thing so that I can tell heart attacks, and it's very direct. But there's all this sort of additional context awareness, sophisticated, and machine learning is very, very sophisticated now.
Sure.
I can dump in a bunch of data, like cell phone records, who I'm talking to, my motion patterns, all sorts of stuff like that, and data mine that, and come up with a lot of useful inferences. And I think that hasn't been done yet. So I think that's something that will be very interesting. Yeah.
And to add on top of that, especially those scenarios we just talk about, I think a lot of these problems will only be solvable with a modular idea, with a modular device. Just imagine, like you have certain kind of condition. At the moment, all wearables, they use a general chipset, and they try to test the same thing with the same technology, like no matter what kind of condition there is. But in terms of like health and medical requirements, a lot of these conditions, you need specific chipset or specific technology to test them. You can't use a general sensor to test them all. So with a modular device, you can build and find a specific technology to look into certain conditions, and that will be a lot more accurate, and that can raise the standard to a medical level, acceptable level. And the more importantly, because with medical conditions, usually you are not looking for one symptoms. You're looking for like multiple symptoms that require different technology and different sensors to look into. And in those situations, you will never be able to find smartwatch or wearables that have fulfill all those requirements. But with a modular idea, what you can do is you can just put all the required technology in the same watch, and then it can check all the conditions at the same time, all the symptoms, and that will be a lot more accurate, and that can actually help solve some of those problems. This is the beauty of modularity.
Okay, so it seems like there's a lot of potential in terms of wearables' ability to capture behavioral information, combine that with big data and draw different diagnoses or services. You guys touched on ergonomics earlier. Okay, I mean, these things used to be big and bulky. Miniaturization has allowed it to fit on my wrist. What we've seen are most designs are still rather small. They're kind of like your Fitbits and your Apple Watches. We've seen wearables masquerading as jewelry. Where do you see developments going in this way? I mean, can we expect more seamless integration say like a suit jacket that doubles as a smartphone. And I mean, with the advent of flexible screens, are we going to start seeing things like the Pip-Boy from Fallout or Leela from Futurama's armband, where you have this giant pop-up screen on your arm? I mean, how far away is this stuff? And I mean, is this a matter of educating the consumer, or is there a real demand? Can I literally get hands-free with my smartphone and just put it on my arm? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think definitely if you look at the trends of technology, we always impress ourselves by essentially the exponential progress that these technologies make. So soon enough, we're going to get miniaturized enough, at low enough power, with projective technologies and stuff to do all these sort of science fiction type applications. Now the question is whether or not it's going to really solve a problem that people do. Again, I get back to the sort of gadget phase of things. It really, I think we're now moving beyond that. Now people, it's not just about the raw functionality, but it's the form, it's the fashion, and things like that. I think fashion is a very interesting point, because when you're talking about a wearable, now you're talking about something that is personalized, right? So now I think people are just starting to get it with Apple Watch and some of these new wearable, the Ringly, these type of applications where there is a fashion element. People are definitely still trying to figure that out. It should be a very interesting space, but it remains to be seen. The combination of functionality and needs and the form factor is going to dictate things. My personal feeling is that the current modalities for input and interfacing with your wearable are going to change. In fact, I'm working on interfacing with some startups now, investing in things which have different modalities. So things like, for example, instead of actually having a microphone or something like that, you can actually use bone conduction technology to actually transmit voice and things like that. So there are, and that's a more natural action, right? So doing something like this, right? So I think there will be new forms of interaction that will come out. Yes.
I believe, especially we touch on to like fashion and like how things look. The interesting thing is, I can't imagine like someone will make a statement say, I want to wear a lot of technology. My look, my style is technology, so I want to make a technology look. It might happen, I'm not saying that it won't happen, but I won't foresee it in the near future. So the way to make technology merge with fashion or like any other like look or style, I think it's about how technology can merge seamlessly into how people want to look. If people do not want, like looking like a technology product is not what people want.
Like a cyborg.
Then like we need to start thinking, how do people want to look? Like, we are like 2015 and we are still wearing suits, which is a tradition from like hundreds of years ago. Right. So fashion and style and this thing don't really change that much with technology, and people have certain look and fashion keep coming back every 10 years. So I think the next wave, if technology want to merge with fashion, is about they need to be seamless, and technology work best when they are seamless. A lot of sensor like smart home or any other case we are working on is about making technology work for you within your daily life without you being knowing. When you need to look at a product, look at a device and work with a device, then you're actually a bit further from the like perfect scenario. Even our watch, we don't try to make it look like a really advanced technology product. We are trying really hard to make it look like a normal watch, because from our community, from what people told us, that's what they want. So like we are making some of the efforts trying to make it seamless and we allow people to use their own imagination and change your watch face, change your case. You can work with different colors and different texture, but it's about them. It's about what they want, not about how we can force ourselves into fashion, but like we should become what people want without them knowing.
I mean, just looking at the wearables on market now, a lot of them do look very machined, very industrial. I don't think I've ever seen a wearable made out of natural fibers or anything like that. I mean, even Fitbit doesn't recommend that you wear your watch too long. Again, there's that fit factor, and how do you wear this stuff comfortably for a long time? I mean, in terms of ergonomics, again, like wearables, the screen is very small. Is it inexorable that we're going to see a bigger screen on wearables?
screen on wearables. I mean, well, if you look at smartwatches, actually, smartphones, that was the case. So in the beginning, there was initially a trend to miniaturize everything. Everything got smaller and smaller in functionality, and then eventually, when the smart functions actually kicked in, then you needed more screen real estate to actually see the web and all that kind of stuff. So I remember going to Japan and looking at their cell phones, and their cell phones were huge. And at the time, all the American cell phones were very small. It looked kind of counterintuitive, but it made a lot of sense afterwards. Now you see iPhone 6, it looks like a phablet, right? So that, I think, is the current generation of technology modality. I think looking forward, you might even be thinking about projective displays or displays that project directly on the retina or things like that. It will totally obsolete any current notion of what a display is today. So I think we have to look forward into the future, not so far in the future, we'll be able to see those.
How far in the future do you think projective displays are?
Well, I think we're getting close. There are some companies now which are directly projecting onto the retina. They have some pretty core patents. I think I would say a handful of years out we'll be able to see some of this stuff. Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Especially you're talking about screens and stuff. We don't believe screen is the future for wearables, because when you wear a watch, especially smartwatch, the screens are so small. So we need to start learning to work with discover new technologies instead of turning a big smartphone into a smaller device and just wear them. There should be different ways we can interact with them and learn information about them. And retina, like wearables devices, as in a glass or projections, those are the future, and they will disrupt the current product within 5 years or 10 years, and then we need to adapt. So as a company, we are ready to do that. We know we can't have the same product for 5-10 years. We'll probably need to keep changing every 2-3 years. That's what all other technologies will do too.
I'd just like to point out, actually in the early 2000s, basically late 90s, because we were pushing sort of the wearable technology, we started the first wearable symposium, and we actually had the first, I believe, the first wearable fashion show. We actually started working with fashion designers back then. And if you look at, the sort of focus, it was all on the sort of blinky light kind of thing. Just futuristic with lots of electronic looking parts and blinky lights. That was sort of the notion of the fashion. Now you fast forward to this day and age, just a few years ago when wearables started becoming sexy again, it's the same thing. Everybody started focusing on blinky lights. It's like nothing transpired in the last 10 or 15 years. And I think that's a general trend. I mean, when we think into the future, we're like, oh, it's got to look futuristic. It's got to have, bioluminescent this and that. And I think the truth will be closer to, you won't be able to tell. It's going to be much more subtle. Things will be integrated into our everyday life, and then when we need to get it, maybe something will pop up and see something, but it's not going to be the Google Glass thing where you have a micro-optical in your face looking like the Borg, right? So I think we need to move more toward, I agree, the sort of natural use in human existence. Yeah.
More subtle, more seamless integration.
That's right. Yeah.
What makes people feel comfortable, basically.
Yeah, comfortable.
As long as you feel comfortable about that technology, that's when that technology will become mainstream.
I see. Okay. Well, this has been a very interesting conversation. This has been Tech China. I'm Timo Chu. Thanks for joining us.